The ultrasound technician's face told me everything I needed to know before she even said a word. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to step out and get the doctor." My hand instinctively moved to my swollen belly. 7 months along with our first child, a daughter. We had already named Lily. I waited alone in that dimly lit room. My husband Ryan nowhere to be found. Again. Later that evening, I stood frozen in our kitchen, staring at the business card the specialist had given me. The words, "high risk," "pregnancy and immediate bed rest" blurring through my tears. The front door opened, and I heard laughter, Ryan's deep chuckle and another voice, lighter, feminine. They stepped into the kitchen together, his arm around her waist. "Emma," he said, not dropping his arm. "This is Zoe. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Her apartment flooded." 4 months later, I stood on the sprawling lawn of Oak Ridge Estate, the historic lakefront property Ryan had fantasized about owning since we first drove past it on our honeymoon road trip. I watched him arrive for the auction, Zoe beside him, both dressed impeccably. He didn't notice me until I raised my bidding paddle, countering his offer. The blood drained from his face when he realized I wasn't just present. I was his competition. When the auctioneer's gavel fell and I became the new owner of his dream home, I didn't feel the vindication I'd expected. I felt something far more powerful: freedom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I met Ryan Mitchell during my final year of college. I was studying graphic design, pulling an all-nighter in the campus coffee shop when he walked in, medical textbooks tucked under his arm. He was handsome in that effortless way, tall with warm brown eyes and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We married 2 years later, just after his residency began at Lakeside Harbor Medical Center. I was 24, starry-eyed, and certain I'd found my forever. The first 5 years were good, at least that's what I told myself. Ryan's surgical career took center stage, and I gradually set aside my design ambitions to manage our life. "It's temporary," he'd assure me when I mentioned starting my own studio. "Once I'm established, you can do whatever you want." I believed him, accepting each compromise as an investment in our shared future. When I turned 30, we decided to try for a baby. After 2 years of fertility treatments, scheduled intimacy, and monthly disappointments, I finally saw those 2 pink lines. Ryan seemed happy, in his reserved way. He bought me flowers and a sterling silver necklace with a small diamond pendant. "For the mother of my child," the card read, in what I later realized was his assistant's handwriting. My pregnancy was difficult from the start. Severe morning sickness kept me homebound for the first trimester, while Ryan's hours at the hospital seemed to grow longer. "Critical cases," he'd explain when I asked why he was coming home at midnight, his collar smelling of unfamiliar perfume. I believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. By my second trimester, I was feeling better physically, but increasingly alone. I decided to surprise Ryan at work one day, bringing his favorite lunch to share in his office. The nurses at the station exchanged glances when I mentioned my plan. "Dr. Mitchell is in surgery," one finally said. "He'll be there all afternoon." I nodded, deciding to leave the lunch with a note. As I turned toward his office, another nurse caught my arm. "He's not in surgery," she whispered. "He left an hour ago with Dr. Carter." I should have confronted him then. Instead, I went home and redecorated the nursery, channeling my suspicions into choosing the perfect shade of yellow for the walls. When Ryan came home that night, I showed him the room, searching his face for genuine excitement. He glanced around, nodded approvingly, and said he had emails to answer. That was the moment. I should have known, but sometimes the heart protects itself from truths the mind already understands. The day of the ultrasound, the day everything changed, had started like any other. Ryan had left before dawn for an early surgery, kissing my forehead while I pretended to sleep. I had the appointment marked on our shared calendar for weeks, highlighted in yellow with 3 exclamation points. He had promised to meet me there. When the technician grew quiet during the scan, I knew something was wrong. The doctor explained that there were complications. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the baby wasn't growing as she should. Complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy, he said firmly. Is there someone who can help you? At home? I nodded automatically, even as I wondered if that was true anymore. I spent the afternoon making arrangements, canceling freelance projects I'd recently taken on, ordering grocery delivery, researching meal prep services. I was so focused on solving practical problems that I didn't allow myself to feel the fear crawling up my spine. When I heard Ryan's key in the lock hours earlier than expected, relief washed over me. Finally, I wouldn't have to face this alone. But he wasn't alone. Zoe Carter was everything I wasn't at 7 months pregnant. Petite, polished, and poised. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves, and her lab coat was crisp white against her emerald blouse. Emma has heard so much about you, she said with practiced warmth, extending her hand as if we were meeting at a dinner party rather than in my kitchen while I struggled to process what was happening. Ryan avoided my eyes as he explained that Zoe's apartment building had flooded and she needed a place to stay temporarily. He had already cleared out the guest room, our home office where I kept my design supplies and portfolio. You don't mind, right? He asked, though it wasn't really a question. Zoe's been an incredible mentor during my cardiac fellowship. I stood there, the specialist's card still clutched in my hand, trying to find words that wouldn't crack and reveal the depth of my devastation. I need bed rest, I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. The baby, there are complications. Ryan's expression flickered with what might have been concern, quickly replaced by calculation. All the more reason to have Zoe here, he said, as if he were doing me a favor. She's a doctor. She can help if anything happens while I'm at work. In that moment, looking at them standing together in my kitchen, my husband and his mentor, who clearly was much more, I realized how completely I had disappeared from my own life. I had become a convenience, then an inconvenience, and now an obligation Ryan was trying to manage with minimal disruption to his actual priorities. I'll make tea, Zoe offered, moving toward the cabinets with the familiarity of someone who had been in my kitchen before, many times. The next weeks unfolded in a surreal haze. I followed the doctor's orders, confined to bed while Zoe gradually occupied more and more space in my home. She cooked dinners I couldn't stomach, rearranged furniture for better flow, and played soft music in the evenings that filtered through my bedroom door, along with muffled conversations and occasional laughter. Ryan checked on me perfunctorily, asking about my blood pressure readings and whether I'd felt the baby move, his questions clinical rather than caring. He slept in the guest room. To give you space to rest, he claimed, though we both knew he was sleeping next to Zoe. My only lifeline was Natalie, my best friend since childhood, who visited daily despite Ryan's obvious irritation. This is beyond inappropriate, she whispered fiercely during one visit, watching Zoe water my houseplants wearing Ryan's old university sweatshirt. You need to throw them both out. And then what? I asked, resting my hands on my belly. I can barely get to the bathroom without getting dizzy. I can't drive myself to appointments. I have to think about Lily now. Natalie squeezed my hand. There are other options. You can stay with me. We'll hire a nurse. But this... She gestured toward the living room where Ryan and Zoe were watching TV together. This is destroying you. She was right, but I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. First, I needed a plan. That night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and began researching. I started with our finances, accounts I had full access to but had rarely monitored, trusting Ryan to manage our money. What I found shocked me. Our savings had dwindled significantly over the past year. there were restaurant charges in neighborhoods. Across town, weekend hotel stays, and a recurring charge for a storage unit I knew nothing about. Most troubling was a separate checking account Ryan had opened 6 months earlier, into which he was depositing a portion of his salary. The statements showed regular transfers to a real estate holding company. I recognized the name immediately. Oak Ridge Acquisitions, LLC. It was the company that owned the historic Oak Ridge Estate, the lakefront property Ryan had been obsessed with since we first came to Lakeside Harbor. Oak Ridge Estate was a magnificent Victorian mansion set on 10 acres overlooking Crescent Lake. Built in the 1890s by a shipping magnate, it had fallen into disrepair over the decades before being partially restored by its current owners. Ryan had always talked about buying it someday, renovating it completely, and making it both our home and a showcase for his success. Surgeons need to project an image, he'd explained, when I questioned whether such a grand property was really your style. Now I understood why he'd been working so many extra shifts and taking additional consulting roles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He wasn't saving for our child's future. He was saving for Oak Ridge. And based on the documents I found, the property was coming up for auction in just over 3 months. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. For the first time in years, I felt something other than accommodation or resignation. I felt anger, pure, clarifying anger that burned away the fog of self-doubt I'd been living in. I also felt something else. Determination. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Eleanor Winters, my former boss at the design agency where I'd worked before gradually giving up my career to support Ryan's. Eleanor had been disappointed when I left, telling me I was throwing away exceptional talent. Now I hoped she would still remember that talent. To my surprise, she answered on the first ring and agreed to visit me that afternoon. Ryan was at the hospital, and Zoe had accompanied him, giving me a rare few hours of privacy. When Eleanor arrived, I explained my situation without self-pity or evasion. I need to restart my career immediately, I told her. I know I'm on a bed rest now, but after the baby comes, I need to be financially independent. Eleanor studied me, her expression a mixture of concern and calculation. The industry has changed since you left, she said finally. But your eye for design was always exceptional. And as it happens, I'm looking for someone to help with several new accounts, work that could be done remotely, at least initially. By the time she left, I had a consulting contract and a promise of full-time work once I was medically cleared. The salary wasn't close to Ryan's surgical income, but it was respectable. And more importantly, it was mine. My next call was to Marcus Henderson, a real estate agent whose brother had been Ryan's patient. We had met at a hospital fundraiser years ago, and I remembered him as sharp and discreet. I explained that I was interested in the upcoming auction of Oak Ridge Estate and needed information. Marcus arrived the following day when Ryan was again conveniently absent. He raised an eyebrow at my pregnant condition but asked no personal questions as he spread documents across my bedside table. The reserve price is significantly lower than market value, he explained. The current owners are facing bankruptcy and need to liquidate quickly, but there will be competition. Including my husband, I said quietly. Marcus paused, then nodded slowly. I suspected as much when you called. Dr. Mitchell has been inquiring about the property for years. What would it take to outbid him? I asked. More resources than most individuals have readily available, Marcus admitted. But there are options. The property qualifies for historical preservation financing. There are also renovation grants, available if you commit to certain restoration parameters. I thought of my grandmother's inheritance, money I had never touched, that Ryan didn't know existed. It wasn't enough to buy Oak Ridge outright, but combined with specialized financing and grants. I want to place a bid, I said firmly, and I don't want my husband to know. Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll need financial documentation and a bidding strategy. This won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, I replied, feeling more like myself than I had in years. Over the next weeks, as my due date approached and Ryan and Zoe became increasingly brazen in their relationship, I worked secretly whenever they were out of the house. Eleanor sent me design projects I could complete from bed. Marcus helped me gather the necessary documentation for financing pre-approval. Natalie assisted with practical matters, setting up a separate bank account, creating a new email address Ryan couldn't access, even helping me interview potential nannies for after the baby arrived. Through it all, I maintained a facade of docile acceptance that seemed to reassure Ryan. He appeared relieved that I wasn't making a scene about Zoe's presence, interpreting my calm as resignation rather than strategy. He had no idea that while he slept, I was laying the groundwork for a future that didn't include him. Lily arrived 3 weeks early, tiny, but perfect, with a determination that matched my own. The delivery was difficult, and afterward, the doctor insisted I remain in the hospital longer than standard. Ryan visited briefly each day, always with Zoe hovering in the background. I noticed he never held his daughter, offering excuses about germs and surgical schedules. When I finally returned home, the house had been subtly transformed. Zoe's belongings were everywhere. Her books on the shelves, her artwork on the walls, her specialty coffee beans in the pantry. The nursery remained untouched but felt separated from the rest of the house, as if it existed in a different dimension. Ryan finally approached me one evening as I nursed Lily in the rocking chair. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, unwilling to fully enter the nursery. "We should talk," he said, his voice strained, "about the future." I looked up at him. This man I had once believed would be my partner through every season of life. "Yes," I agreed softly. "We should." "This isn't working," he continued, gaining confidence when I didn't immediately object. "We've been growing apart for years. You must have felt it too." I nodded, encouraging him to continue digging his own grave. "Zoe and I—" He hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "We've connected on a level that you and I never did. She understands the demands of my career, the lifestyle that goes with my position. And I don't," I supplied, keeping my voice neutral. "You wanted different things," he said, as if our diverging paths were a mutual decision rather than his unilateral choice. "A simpler life. This baby." He gestured vaguely toward Lily. "I tried to want those things too, but I'm meant for more." I could have argued then, pointed out that I had sacrificed my own ambitions to support his, that his greater purpose seemed to consist primarily of status and acquisition. But what would be the point? The man standing before me was a stranger, wearing my husband's face. "What are you proposing?" I asked instead. Relief flooded his expression. "A divorce, obviously. I'll be generous with child support. You can keep this house. It's too small for what Zoe and I have planned anyway. We're looking at properties better suited to our position in the community." "Properties like Oak Ridge Estate?" I asked innocently. His eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know about that?" I shrugged. "You've talked about it for years. And the auction is coming up soon, isn't it?" "In 3 weeks," he confirmed, studying me with newfound wariness. "Not that it matters to you." "Of course not," I agreed, returning my attention to Lily. "When will you have the divorce papers? Ready?" Ryan left the nursery looking slightly unsettled but mostly victorious. He had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps begging. My calm acceptance had thrown him off balance, but not enough to make him suspicious. His ego wouldn't allow him to imagine I might have plans of my own. The day of the auction dawned clear and cool. Natalie arrived early to help me prepare and to stay with Lily. I dressed carefully in an emerald green dress that matched my eyes and disguised the lingering curves of recent pregnancy. My hair was freshly cut into a sleek bob that made me look more sophisticated and somehow more formidable. As I applied my makeup, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Not because she looked unlike me, but because she finally looked like the person I was meant to be all along. Marcus met me at the Lakeside Harbor Convention Center, contract documents and financing approval letters organized in a leather portfolio. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one final time. "Once the bidding starts, there's no turning back." I thought about the past 7 months, the humiliation of watching another woman take my place while I carried my husband's child, the quiet rage I had channeled into meticulous planning, the future I was now determined to create on my terms. "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied. The auction room was already filling when we entered. Marcus guided me to seats near the back, positioning himself slightly in front of me to provide some privacy. I scanned the crowd, finally, spotting Ryan and Zoe near the front, their heads bent together in conversation. They looked confident, entitled, a power couple certain of their imminent acquisition. The auctioneer began with the usual preliminaries, describing Oak Ridge Estate in glowing terms, its historical significance, the recent structural improvements, the unparalleled lakefront setting. The opening bid was set at $1, $2 million, significantly below market value but still substantial. Bidding began cautiously. A few early participants dropped out quickly as the price climbed past $1. $5 million. Ryan entered the bidding at $1. $8 million. His paddle raised with casual confidence. Zoe squeezed his arm, her expression triumphant, as if the property were already theirs. At Marcus's signal, I raised my paddle for the first time. $2 million, the auctioneer acknowledged, looking toward the back of the room. Ryan turned, searching for this unexpected competition. When his eyes found mine, his expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. Zoe followed his gaze, her perfect features contorting briefly before she whispered urgently in his ear. The bidding continued, the price, climbing in smaller increments now. Ryan and I countered each other methodically while other bidders dropped away. At $2. $4 million, Ryan hesitated for the first time, conferring with someone on his phone, likely his financial advisor. When he raised his paddle again, there was tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. As we approached $7 million, Marcus leaned close. "This is nearing the limit of what your financing will support," he murmured. "Are you prepared to go higher?" I watched Ryan and Zoe huddled in urgent discussion. His face was flushed, his movements increasingly agitated. He had not anticipated serious competition, certainly not from his soon-to-be ex-wife, whom he believed to be financially dependent on him. One more bid, I decided, calculating rapidly. It would stretch my resources to the absolute limit, requiring me to commit my entire inheritance and maximize every financing option Marcus had arranged. It would be years of careful budgeting and hard work. But the expression on Ryan's face, in this moment, made every potential sacrifice worthwhile. When the auctioneer called for $2, $75 million, I raised my paddle one final time. The room had grown quiet, the audience sensing the drama unfolding between Ryan and me. He stared at me across the crowd, his expression a mixture of fury and dawning fear as he realized he might actually lose. After a hurried conversation with Zoe and another phone call, Ryan shook his head slightly at the auctioneer's inquiry. For $2, $8 million. $275 million going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Ryan was still staring at me, his face now drained of color. Sold to bidder number 42 for $275 million. The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. I had done it. Oak Ridge Estate, the symbol of everything Ryan had worked toward, the future he had planned with Zoe while discarding me, was now mine. As Marcus guided me through the immediate paperwork required to secure the purchase, Ryan approached, his expression thunderous. Zoe trailed behind him, her perfect composure finally fractured. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, low enough to avoid a scene but with unmistakable menace. I met his gaze calmly. "Buying a property at public auction. It's all perfectly legal." "With what money?" he hissed. "Where did you get nearly $3 million? "You never asked about my grandmother's inheritance," I said simply. "You were too busy building your own empire to wonder about mine." "You can't do this," Zoe interjected, her voice tight with controlled panic. "We had plans for Oak Ridge. Ryan's been working toward this for years." "Yes, I know exactly what he's been working toward," I replied, turning my attention back to the closing documents. "And now he'll have to find a different showcase for his success." Ryan grabbed my arm, forcing me to look at him. "This is spite. Pure and simple. You're punishing me because I fell in love with someone else." I gently but firmly removed his hand. "This isn't about you, Ryan. Not anymore. This is about the future I'm building for myself and for Lily." "You're going to live there?" he asked incredulously. "A single mother in a 10,000 square foot historic mansion? It's absurd." "Actually," Marcus interjected smoothly, "Mrs. Mitchell has an excellent business plan for the property. The main floor will become a design studio and gallery with residential quarters upstairs. The carriage house will be converted to a women's business incubator. The Lakeside Harbor Historical Society is quite excited about her vision." Ryan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as his wife or Lily's mother, but as a woman with ambitions and capabilities entirely separate from him. The realization came too late. "You'll fail," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "You can't possibly manage a property of this scale." "I guess we'll find out," I replied, signing the final document with a flourish. "Now, if you'll— Excuse me, I need to get home to our daughter." 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of Oak Ridge Estate, my estate, watching the sunset cast golden light across Crescent Lake. Behind me, the sounds of the gallery's grand opening filtered. Through the open French doors, conversations, laughter, the gentle notes of a string quartet. Eleanor moved to stand beside me, champagne flute in hand. "The show is a tremendous success," she said, genuine pride in her voice. "3 of your pieces have already sold, and Marcus tells me 2 different magazines want to feature the renovation in their fall issues." I smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought me here. The months of intensive work restoring Oak Ridge while simultaneously rebuilding my design career. The sleepless nights with Lily nestled against me in the small apartment we'd lived in during renovations. The moments of doubt when the task seemed too enormous, the vision too ambitious. "Have you seen who just arrived?" Eleanor asked, nodding toward the entrance where Ryan stood awkwardly, alone and clearly uncomfortable. Zoe was noticeably absent. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that she had recently accepted a position at a hospital across the country. "He wasn't invited," I murmured, though I wasn't particularly surprised by his appearance. "Do you want me to have him removed?" I considered the question, watching as Ryan surveyed the crowded gallery, taking in the successful execution of a vision he had never believed I could achieve. "No," I decided. "Let him see." As if sensing my gaze, Ryan turned toward the terrace. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, I felt the echo of our shared history. The dreams we had once had, the life we had planned together, the love that had gradually eroded under the constant pressure of his ambition and my compliance. Then Natalie appeared at my side, Lily in her arms. My daughter reached for me, her small face lighting up with recognition and joy. I took her, breathing in her sweet baby scent as I turned back toward the lake, toward the future stretching before us, a future built not on dependency or compromise, but on courage and self-determination. When I glanced back toward the entrance, Ryan was gone. I felt no triumph in his departure, no vindication in his evident regret. Those emotions belonged to an earlier chapter, to a woman who still defined herself in relation to him, the woman I had become, the woman standing on the terrace of her own achievement, child in arms, surrounded by the fruits of her vision and labor, had no need for such hollow victories. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared over Crescent Lake, I carried Lily back into the gallery, into the home and the life we were building together, one brushstroke, one day, one choice at a time. The weeks following that fateful evening in my kitchen were among the most surreal of my life. The doctor had ordered complete bed rest, which meant I was essentially trapped in our bedroom while Ryan and Zoe played house in the rest of our home. They seemed to grow bolder with each passing day, as if my medical confinement gave them permission to inhabit the space more fully, more confidently. From my bed, I could hear them in the evenings, the clinking of wine glasses, soft music playing, occasional laughter floating up the stairs. Sometimes they would cook together, exotic recipes filling the house with aromas that turned my already sensitive stomach. Once, I heard Zoe exclaim over a dish Ryan had prepared, "This is incredible! Where did you learn to make this?" His response, low and intimate. "I taught myself. Emma only cooks basic things." The casual cruelty of that comment lingered with me through a sleepless night. Ryan knew perfectly well that I had taken cooking classes for years, specifically to prepare the gourmet meals he claimed to prefer. I had dozens of cookbooks dog-eared with recipes he had praised, only to later critique as not quite restaurant. Quality. Somehow, in the revisionist history he was creating with Zoe, I had become a bland, unimaginative partner who couldn't satisfy his sophisticated tastes. The dynamic between them was painful to witness, not just for the obvious betrayal, but for how it illuminated what my marriage had truly been. Ryan spoke to Zoe differently than he had spoken to me in years, with attention, with interest, with a desire to impress. He laughed more freely, expressed opinions more passionately. With me, he had become increasingly distant, his conversations perfunctory, his tone often tinged with barely concealed impatience. Had he always seen me as inadequate? Or had I simply served my purpose in the early years of his career, providing stability and support while he climbed the surgical ranks, only to become an inconvenient reminder of his more humble beginnings, once he achieved status? These questions circled my mind as I lay in bed, one hand resting on my growing belly, feeling Lily's movements become stronger and more defined. Each kick, each somersault, each hiccup reminded me that regardless of how my marriage was unraveling, I was creating something miraculous. This small, determined life inside me became my focal point, the reason to swallow my pride and endure the humiliation of my current circumstances. Natalie visited daily, bringing groceries, checking my blood pressure, and providing my only reliable connection to the outside world. She was furious on my behalf, barely able to maintain civility when she encountered Ryan or Zoe in the house. "I don't understand how you can be so calm," she whispered one afternoon, after passing Zoe in the hallway hanging framed photographs, including several of her and Ryan at what appeared to be a weekend getaway. "If it were me, there would be screaming. There would be property damage." I smiled faintly. Believe me, I've imagined throwing things. But what would that accomplish, other than raising my blood pressure and potentially harming Lily? Besides, I added, lightly touching the notepad where I'd been jotting ideas for my conversation with Eleanor, "I'm not as calm as I appear." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" "For now, survival. After that." I glanced toward the window where spring sunlight was filtering through the blinds. "After that, I'm planning to rebuild my life on my terms, not his." Natalie studied me, then nodded slowly. "You're different," she said finally. "There's something in your eyes I haven't seen in a long time." What's that? Fire, she replied simply. She was right. Despite the physical limitations of bed rest, despite the daily indignities of my situation, I felt more mentally alert, more strategically focused than I had in years. My conversations with Eleanor and Marcus had ignited something that had been slowly smothering under the weight of my marriage, a belief in my own capabilities, independent of Ryan's validation or approval. Eleanor's visit had been particularly transformative. She arrived exactly as promised, bearing a portfolio of current design projects and industry publications. Though nearly a decade had passed since we'd worked together, she greeted me with the same brisk affection I remembered, her elegant silver bob and impeccable style unchanged by time. "You look dreadful," she announced, settling into the chair beside my bed. "But I suppose that's to be expected under the circumstances." I laughed, startled by her frankness after weeks of careful conversations with medical professionals and pointed silences with Ryan. "It's good to see you too, Eleanor." She waved away my response, already opening her portfolio. "I assume you haven't kept up with industry developments while playing doctor's wife, so let me bring you up to speed." For the next hour, she outlined the major shifts in design trends, technology, and client expectations. She was matter-of-fact about the challenges I would face re-entering the field after such a long absence, but equally straightforward about my strengths. "Your portfolio was exceptional, clean, innovative, emotionally resonant. That kind of innate talent doesn't disappear. It just needs refreshing." She fixed me with her penetrating gaze. "The question is whether you're serious about coming back, or if this is simply a reaction to your domestic situation." "Does it matter?" I asked, genuinely curious. "If I produce good work?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "I suppose not, as long as the work is good. But I don't invest in temporary solutions or revenge projects. I invest in designers who are committed to the craft for its own sake." I considered her words carefully. Was I simply reacting to Ryan's betrayal, grasping at my former identity, out of desperation? Or was there something more substantial driving this renewed interest in my career? "When I left the agency," I said slowly, "I told myself it was a pause, not an ending. That I was prioritizing Ryan's career temporarily because his earning potential was greater, and eventually I would return to design." I traced the pattern on my bedspread, remembering the gradual series of compromises that had led me here. But temporary became permanent, so gradually I barely noticed. Each time I mentioned returning to work, there was always a reason to wait. A move, a promotion, fertility treatments, social obligations that supported his position. I looked up, meeting Eleanor's steady gaze. I don't think I realized until recently how completely I'd surrendered my professional identity, not because it was strategically necessary, but because it was easier than constantly justifying my ambitions to someone who saw them as secondary. And now? Now I need financial independence, yes. But more than that, I need to remember who I am separate from my marriage. I need to create something that's genuinely mine. I rested my hand on my belly. For myself and for my daughter. Eleanor nodded, satisfied with my response. "In that case, I have a proposition." The consulting contract she offered was modest but flexible, perfect for my current circumstances. I would start with straightforward projects, redesigning, marketing materials for existing clients, contributing to pitch presentations, providing feedback on design concepts. The work could be done remotely, on my own schedule, with minimal client interaction initially. "Once you're back on your feet physically, we can discuss expanding your role," Eleanor said as she prepared to leave. "The industry has always needed more designers with life experience beyond the typical career path. Your perspective as a mother, as someone who's navigated significant life changes, that's valuable, not detrimental." Her words stayed with me long after she departed, a counterpoint to the subtle messaging I'd absorbed throughout my marriage. That motherhood and creative ambition were somehow incompatible, that domesticity required the sacrifice of professional identity, that supporting Ryan's career was contribution enough. My meeting with Marcus Henderson, the real estate agent, further solidified my emerging plan. Unlike Eleanor, who had known me in my professional prime, Marcus knew me only as Dr. Mitchell's wife, the pleasant, well-dressed woman who attended hospital fundraisers and physician dinner parties. His surprise at my interest in Oak Ridge Estate was evident, though professionally concealed. "It's an exceptional property," he explained, showing me detailed photographs of the mansion's interior. 6 bedrooms, 5 full bathrooms, a library, conservatory, formal dining room, and a ballroom. That could be repurposed as a grand entertaining space. The grounds include gardens, a carriage house, and approximately 400 feet of lake frontage with a private dock. "And the condition?" I asked, examining the structural assessment report he'd brought. "Better than you might expect, given its age. The foundation is solid, the roof was replaced 5 years ago, and the electrical system has been completely updated. It needs cosmetic renovation throughout. The current owner's taste runs to heavy Victorian reproductions, but the bones are excellent." I nodded, already envisioning what could be done with the space. Not as the showcase for surgical success that Ryan had planned, but as something else entirely. A home, yes, but also perhaps a studio, a gallery, a place where creativity could flourish. "The auction is scheduled for June 17th, Marcus continued. "Based on comparable properties and the current owner's financial situation, I expect the bidding to start around $1. $2 million, potentially reaching $5 million or higher, depending on interest." I did the calculations quickly. My grandmother's inheritance, carefully invested over the years by her financial advisor, had grown to just over $1. $8 million. It wasn't enough to comfortably purchase a property of this caliber outright, but combined with the specialized financing, Marcus mentioned. "I know this is a substantial investment," Marcus said, misinterpreting my silence as hesitation. "Perhaps you'd prefer to look at smaller properties to begin with." "No," I said firmly. "This is the one. I just need to determine the most strategic approach." Marcus studied me with new interest. "If you're serious about bidding, we should discuss financing options immediately. The pre-approval process for historical properties is more complex than standard residential mortgages." "I understand, and I need absolute discretion. My husband cannot know about this." If Marcus was surprised by this stipulation, he didn't show it. "Of course, client confidentiality is paramount in my practice." As he gathered his materials to leave, he paused. "May I ask a personal question, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Emma, please." "And yes. Why this property specifically? There are other historic homes in Lakeside Harbor with similar features at lower price points." I considered deflecting, but something about Marcus's forthright manner encouraged honesty. "Because it matters to my husband. Because he's imagined owning it for years, showing it off to colleagues, using it to solidify his place in the medical community." "And you want to prevent that?" His tone was neutral, professional. "I want to reclaim something for myself," I corrected. "Ryan has taken so much. My career, my self-confidence, my sense of security. Now he's taking my marriage, my family's wholeness. Oak Ridge represents everything he values: status, achievement, appearance." I met Marcus's gaze steadily. "If I can transform it into something that represents what I value, beauty, creativity, authenticity, that feels like poetic justice." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand. And for what it's worth, I believe the property would benefit from your vision rather than being turned into another doctor's showplace. Lakeside Harbor has enough of those already." With Eleanor's contract providing immediate income and Marcus working on financing options for Oak Ridge, I turned my attention to the most immediate challenge, delivering a healthy baby while maintaining my sanity in a home that increasingly felt like a stage set for Ryan and Zoe's new life together. The practical realities of bed rest were more challenging than I had anticipated. Simple tasks, showering, preparing meals, doing laundry, became logistical puzzles. Ryan made a show of concern, checking that I had everything I needed before leaving for the hospital each morning, but the substance of actual assistance fell to Natalie and, ironically, Zoe. Zoe's help was the most difficult to accept. She would bring me meals on a tray, help change the sheets on my bed, even offer to assist me to the bathroom when my dizziness was particularly bad. Her manner was professionally competent, reminiscent of nurses I'd encountered during fertility treatments, kind but detached, with no acknowledgement of the bizarre triangle we were living in. "Your blood pressure is still elevated," she noted. One afternoon, removing the cuff she'd wrapped around my arm. "Are you taking the medication as prescribed?" "Yes," I replied, fighting the surreal feeling of being treated as a patient by my husband's mistress in my own bedroom. "You should try to reduce stress," she continued, making a note on the small pad she carried. "Emotional distress can affect the baby's development." I stared at her, wondering if she was actually oblivious to the absurdity of her advice, or if this was some form of psychological warfare. How exactly was I supposed to reduce stress while watching my marriage disintegrate from the confines of bed rest? "I'll keep that in mind," I said finally, my tone neutral. "Perhaps you could help by moving out of my house." Zoe looked up, her professional mask slipping for a moment to reveal something like discomfort. "Ryan thinks it's best if I stay, given your condition." "And what do you think, Zoe?" She hesitated, clearly unprepared for direct confrontation. "I think I should defer to Ryan's medical judgment." "Ryan is a cardiac surgeon, not an obstetrician," I pointed out. "And his judgment regarding my well-being seems questionable at best, considering the circumstances." Zoe's composure faltered further. "This isn't. I didn't intend." She stopped, regrouped. "The situation is complicated." "Not from where I'm sitting," I replied calmly. "It seems quite straightforward. You're sleeping with my husband, in my home while I'm pregnant with his child and medically unable to leave. The only complication is your mutual refusal to be honest about it." A flush spread across Zoe's face. For a moment, I thought she might actually acknowledge the truth, might offer some explanation or even apology. Instead, she retreated to professional distance. "You should rest now," she said, gathering her medical supplies. "I'll bring dinner at 6. After she left, I lay back against the pillows, oddly energized by the exchange. There had been something satisfying about naming the reality we were all pretending to ignore, about watching Zoe's careful facade crack, even momentarily. More importantly, the conversation had confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Zoe wasn't the calculating homewrecker of easy stereotypes. She was uncomfortable with the situation, perhaps even ashamed of her role in it. Ryan, I realized, was the true architect of our current arrangement. He was using Zoe's medical expertise as justification for her presence, just as he had used my pregnancy as an excuse to separate himself physically by sleeping in the guest room. This insight didn't excuse Zoe's choices, but it did clarify the power dynamics at play. Ryan had positioned himself as the authority, the decision-maker, the one whose needs and preferences shaped our shared reality. Zoe and I were both in different ways accommodating him. She by accepting a morally ambiguous role in our household, I by silently enduring it. The difference was that I could now see the pattern clearly, while Zoe was still entangled in the illusion that Ryan's preferences constituted some form of objective truth. How long, I wondered, before she realized what I had finally understood? That Ryan's validation was a moving target, that his approval was conditional on perpetual accommodation of his ego? The following morning, I began working on my first design. Project for Eleanor, a rebranding package for a boutique financial services firm. The work was straightforward but engaging, requiring me to research current trends in financial marketing and develop concepts that balanced professionalism with approachability. I set up a makeshift workspace on my bed. Laptop, sketchpad, reference materials Eleanor had provided. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I lost myself completely in creative work. Hours passed unnoticed as I sketched concepts, refined typography choices, and developed color palettes. When Ryan came home that evening and found me surrounded by design materials, his confusion was evident. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing to my workspace. "I'm consulting on a design project," I replied simply, not looking up from my sketch. "Is that wise in your condition?" His tone carried the familiar note of concern layered over control. "The doctor said you should be resting, minimizing stress." "Actually, this is reducing my stress," I countered, finally meeting his gaze. "It gives me something constructive to focus on instead of our current living arrangement." Ryan's expression hardened slightly. "I thought we had an understanding about that." "Did we? I don't recall agreeing to anything. You announced Zoe was moving in, and I've been too physically compromised to object effectively." He sighed, adopting the patient expression he typically used when explaining medical concepts to patients he considered intellectually limited. "Emma, this isn't about Zoe. This is about ensuring you have proper medical supervision while I'm at work. Your pregnancy is high risk. You need monitoring." "I need honesty," I corrected quietly. "I need my husband to acknowledge that he's having an affair with his colleague and has moved her into our home while I'm carrying his child." Ryan's facade of concern dissolved, replaced by cold anger. "This is exactly why I didn't want to have this conversation yet. You're emotional, you're not thinking clearly, and your blood pressure is already elevated." "My blood pressure is elevated because my husband is gaslighting me," I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. "Because he's asking me to accept a humiliating situation while pretending it's for my benefit." Ryan stared at me, clearly unaccustomed to this version of his wife, the one who named uncomfortable truths instead of smoothing them over, who challenged his narrative instead of accepting it. "We'll discuss this when you're more rational," he said finally, turning to leave. "When will that be, Ryan? After Lily is born? After you've decided whether our marriage is worth saving, or whether Zoe is a more suitable partner for the next phase of your career?" He paused in the doorway, his back to me. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I said softly. "But it is happening, and pretending otherwise doesn't make it less real." After a long moment, he left without responding, closing the door, with deliberate gentleness that somehow felt more dismissive than a slam would have been. I returned to my design work, channeling my frustration into creativity. By midnight, I had completed the initial concepts for the financial firm's rebranding, clean, sophisticated designs that conveyed stability without stuffiness, expertise without arrogance. I emailed them to Eleanor, then finally allowed myself to rest, one hand resting protectively over Lily. The next weeks fell into a strange rhythm. During the day, while Ryan was at the hospital and Zoe was either with him or handling administrative tasks from our home office, I divided my time between design projects for Eleanor and preparations for Lily's arrival. Natalie helped organize the nursery, assembling furniture and arranging the supplies we'd need for a newborn. In the evenings, I retreated to my bedroom, avoiding the awkward dynamics downstairs where Ryan and Zoe maintained the fiction that their relationship was purely professional, despite increasingly obvious evidence to the contrary. They attended medical conferences together, went for colleagues' dinners that stretched late into the night, and spoke in the shorthand of people who shared intimate knowledge of each other's preferences. My design work for Eleanor progressed from simple, rebranding projects to more complex assignments. She was pleased with my initial contributions, and gradually increased my responsibilities, including me in client presentations via video conference and soliciting my input on strategic decisions for the agency. "You haven't lost your touch," she told me after a particularly successful presentation. "If anything, you've gained a subtlety that was missing earlier in your career. Less flash, more substance." Meanwhile, Marcus continued preparing for the Oak Ridge auction, securing preliminary financing approval, and helping me develop a bidding strategy. "The key is to appear confident, but not desperate," he advised during one of our planning sessions. "Dr. Mitchell's consortium will likely come in strong, hoping to intimidate other bidders. We'll need to be strategic about when and how we counter." As my due date approached, the tension in the house intensified. Ryan became increasingly distant, spending more time at the hospital and less in our home. When he was present, he performed the role of concerned husband mechanically, asking prescribed questions about my health without appearing to care about the answers. Zoe, conversely, became more attentive, almost solicitous. She prepared nutritious meals, researched optimal sleeping positions for late pregnancy, and seemed genuinely invested in my well-being. The contradiction between her medical concern and her personal choices created a cognitive dissonance that neither of us acknowledged directly. One evening, after a particularly uncomfortable prenatal appointment where the doctor had expressed concern about Lily's growth, I returned home to find Zoe alone in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be a complicated vegetable stew. "The doctor recommended more iron," she explained, noticing my glance at the ingredients spread across the counter. "This recipe is specifically designed for prenatal nutrition." I nodded, too tired to maintain the usual barriers between us. "Thank you." She hesitated, then set down the knife she'd been using to chop kale. "Emma, I know this is an impossible situation. I want you to know that I never intended—" "Please don't," I interrupted quietly. "Let's not pretend this is a misunderstanding or an accident. You made choices. Ryan made choices. There are consequences to those choices that go beyond your feelings or intentions." Zoe looked stricken. "I understand you're angry." "I'm not angry," I corrected, realizing as I spoke that it was true. "I'm disappointed. In Ryan, for betraying our marriage. In you for participating in that betrayal while presenting yourself as concerned for my health. But mostly in myself, for becoming someone who could be so easily discarded." "That's not—" Zoe began, then stopped herself. "Ryan doesn't speak about your marriage. He doesn't criticize you or blame you. He just says you've grown apart, that you want different things." I laughed softly without humor. Of course he doesn't criticize me openly. That would make him the villain of the story. It's much neater to frame this as a mutual growing apart, a natural evolution. That way he maintains his self-image as the reasonable one, the good guy who just happened to fall in love with someone new. Zoe was silent, her expression troubled. "Tell me something, Zoe," I continued, suddenly curious. "Does Ryan ever talk about Lily? About becoming a father? Does he include her in these different things the two of you supposedly want?" A flash of discomfort crossed her face. Answer enough. "I thought not," I said quietly, "because Lily represents a complication to the narrative. She's a permanent connection to me, a responsibility that doesn't align with the unencumbered future he's imagining with you." "He'll be a good father," Zoe insisted, though her tone lacked conviction. "He's just adjusting to the idea." "He's had 7 months to adjust," I pointed out. "He hasn't attended a single prenatal appointment. He hasn't helped prepare the nursery. He hasn't even selected a single item for his daughter." I moved toward the door, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. "Dinner smells wonderful, but I'm not hungry. Good night, Zoe." Later that night, I felt the first contractions, mild but distinctive, a tightening across my lower abdomen that came and went in regular intervals. Too early, I thought with rising panic. Lily wasn't due for another 3 weeks, and the doctor had warned that premature delivery could complicate her already delicate condition. I monitored the contractions for an hour, timing their frequency and duration. When they began coming 5 minutes apart, I finally called downstairs to the guest room where Ryan and Zoe were presumably together. Ryan answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "What is it?" "I'm having contractions," I said simply. 5 minutes apart, lasting about 45 seconds each. There was a pause, then the sound of movement. "I'll be right up." He appeared moments later, hair tousled but expression alert as he shifted into professional mode. He checked my pulse, felt my abdomen during a contraction, and asked clinical questions about pain levels and other symptoms. "This could be false labor," he said finally. "But given your history, we should go to the hospital to be sure." I nodded, already reaching for the hospital bag I'd packed weeks earlier. "Where's Zoe?" I asked, not seeing her hovering in the hallway as expected. Ryan looked uncomfortable for the first time. "She thought it would be better if she stayed here. Less complicated." I bit back a comment about complications that should have been considered earlier, focusing instead on the practical task of getting to the hospital safely. The ride passed in tense silence, broken only by my breathing exercises during contractions. At the hospital, Ryan's status ensured immediate attention despite the busy emergency room. I was admitted quickly, hooked up to monitors that tracked both my vital signs and Lily's. "The baby is showing signs of distress," the obstetrician on call informed us after reviewing the monitor readouts. "And your blood pressure is dangerously elevated. We need to perform an emergency C-section." Events moved quickly after that. I was prepped for surgery, Ryan changing into scrubs to accompany me as both husband and medical professional. In the operating room, bright lights and efficient movement created a surreal atmosphere as the surgical team prepared to deliver Lily weeks ahead of schedule. As the anesthesiologist administered the spinal block, I felt a strange calm descend. Whatever happened in my marriage, whatever complications awaited in my future, this moment, the birth of my daughter, remained sacred. Ryan stood near my head during the procedure, his expression unreadable behind his surgical mask. When the doctor announced, "Here she comes," his eyes moved to the surgical field, professional interest momentarily overriding personal distance. And then Lily was there, tiny, red-faced, her cries surprisingly strong for her premature state. The pediatrician quickly assessed her, announcing, 5 pounds, 2 ounces, good respiratory effort, healthy color. Relief washed through me as they briefly laid her on my chest, her warm weight the most perfect thing I had ever felt. Ryan watched without touching either of us, maintaining a careful distance that seemed both physical and emotional. When a nurse asked if he wanted to hold his daughter, he shook his head. "I should scrub out properly first. Infection risk." It was a reasonable precaution from a medical perspective, yet the moment crystallized everything wrong in our relationship. Even here, at the birth of his child, Ryan was creating distance, using professional protocols as a shield against genuine engagement. As they wheeled me to recovery, Lily safely ensconced in the neonatal unit for observation, I found myself strangely at peace. The physical ordeal of pregnancy was over. My daughter was healthy despite her early arrival, and I had clarity about my marriage that no amount of discussion or counseling could have provided. Ryan Mitchell was fundamentally incapable of showing up, truly showing up, for the messy, uncontrollable aspects of life. He could perform the role of caring husband or concerned father when it aligned with his self-image, but when genuine vulnerability was required, he retreated to the safety of professional distance and rational detachment. Understanding this didn't immediately solve the practical challenges ahead: recovering from surgery, caring for a premature infant, navigating divorce, pursuing the Oak Ridge auction. But it freed me from the lingering hope that Ryan might somehow transform into the partner I had once believed him to be. As I drifted in and out of consciousness in the recovery room, I found myself making plans. Practical, immediate plans for the weeks ahead, and larger, more ambitious plans for the future Lily and I would build together. Whatever happened with Ryan, with Zoe, with Oak Ridge Estate, I knew with absolute certainty that Lily and I would be okay. More than okay. We would be magnificent. The hospital kept Lily in the neonatal care unit for 10 days. She was tiny but resilient, gaining strength. Each day as she overcame the challenges of her premature birth, I spent every possible moment by her side, marveling at her delicate features and fierce determination. Her tiny hand would curl around my finger with surprising strength, as if to say, "I'm here, I'm fighting, and I'm not going anywhere." Ryan visited sporadically, his appearances brief and formal. He would review Lily's chart, speak with the neonatal specialists in medical jargon that excluded me from the conversation, and depart with vague promises to return soon. He never held her, never touched her beyond the clinical assessment of her reflexes. I told myself it was his way of coping with the emotional complexity of becoming a father under such strained circumstances. But deep down, I recognized the pattern. Ryan retreating from anything that couldn't be controlled or predicted. Natalie became my lifeline during those days, bringing fresh clothes, helping me pump breast milk for Lily, and providing the emotional support that Ryan couldn't or wouldn't offer. She was with me the day Lily was finally cleared for discharge, helping navigate the paperwork and preparing my home for our return. Zoe moved most of her things out yesterday, Natalie informed me as we drove from the hospital. Left a note saying she thought it would be easier for everyone. Ryan's been sleeping at the hospital, according to the nurses' gossip. I nodded, unsurprised. Zoe's departure was inevitable once the abstract notion of my pregnancy became the reality of a newborn. Whatever narrative she and Ryan had constructed about their relationship, it likely hadn't included midnight feedings and diaper changes. The house felt different when we arrived. Quieter, emptier, yet somehow more authentically mine than it had been in months. I settled Lily into the nursery, grateful for the peaceful transition. The next few days established a new rhythm. Nursing sessions every 2 hours, brief periods of sleep whenever possible, and the gradual healing of my C-section incision. Throughout it all, I continued my design work during Lily's naps, laptop, balanced carefully to avoid my tender abdomen. Eleanor was remarkably accommodating, extending deadlines and adjusting expectations while maintaining her belief in my capabilities. Motherhood and creativity aren't mutually exclusive, she reminded me during a video call as I nursed Lily just outside the camera frame. Some of my best designers are parents who've learned to see the world through fresh eyes. Ryan finally appeared 5 days after we came home, looking uncomfortable as he stood in the nursery doorway watching me change Lily's diaper. "How is she?" he asked, maintaining his distance. "Growing stronger every day," I replied, securing the diaper and lifting Lily to my shoulder. "She gained 4 ounces since leaving the hospital." He nodded, his gaze clinical rather than paternal. "The pediatrician is pleased?" "Very. She says Lily's development is excellent considering her premature birth." I kissed the top of Lily's head, breathing in her sweet scent. "Would you like to hold her?" Ryan hesitated, then shook his head. Slightly. "I should wash up first, maybe next time." It was the same excuse he'd used in the delivery room, now stripped of even the pretense of medical necessity. I simply nodded, refusing to beg him to bond with his daughter. "We need to talk," he said finally, shifting his weight. "About our situation." "Yes," I agreed, settling into the nursery's rocking chair with Lily. "We do." He remained in the doorway, as if crossing the threshold would commit him to a level of involvement he wasn't prepared for. "I've been thinking about what would be best for everyone involved." I nearly laughed at the plural, as if his decisions had ever truly considered anyone's needs but his own. And what have you concluded? A clean break would be simplest, he said, his tone suggesting he was proposing the most reasonable solution to a complicated problem. Quick divorce, generous settlement, shared custody on paper, but with the understanding that Lily would primarily live with you. On paper, but with the understanding, I repeated slowly, meaning you want legal rights to your daughter without the responsibility of actually parenting her. His expression tightened. That's an unfair characterization. I'm being realistic. About my schedule, my commitments. Your priorities, I corrected gently. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. This doesn't have to be contentious, Emma. I'm willing to be more than fair financially. Where's Zoe? I asked, the question catching him off guard. He blinked, then frowned slightly. That's not relevant to our discussion. Isn't it? You moved her into our home while I was on bed rest. You prioritized her comfort over mine during my pregnancy. Now suddenly she's nowhere to be found. I think that's quite relevant to understanding your current proposal. Ryan's jaw tightened in the way it did when he felt cornered. Zoe has taken a temporary assignment at Boston Medical Center. We agreed it would be best to create some distance while these matters are settled. So Zoe had recognized what Ryan had not, that their relationship had been built on fantasy rather than reality, on the excitement of forbidden connection rather than the mundane challenges of daily life. I wondered if she had seen his reaction to Lily and realized what that revealed about his character, about his capacity for genuine care versus performative concern. I'll need time to consider your proposal, I said finally, returning my attention to Lily, who was beginning to fuss. And I'll want everything in writing, reviewed by my attorney. Ryan looked surprised. You've retained an attorney? Last month, I confirmed. Natalie's cousin specializes in family law. She's been very helpful in outlining my options. His surprise shifted to wariness. There's no need to make this adversarial, Emma. I'm trying to be generous. And I'm trying to be prudent, I replied calmly. Two different approaches to the same situation. After he left, promising to have his lawyer draft preliminary terms, I continued rocking Lily until she drifted to sleep. Ryan's visit had confirmed what I already suspected. He wanted freedom from his marriage without the public relations damage of abandoning his newborn daughter. He wanted to appear responsible on paper while minimizing actual involvement in Lily's life. In the weeks that followed, I regained my physical strength while finalizing preparations for the Oak Ridge auction. Marcus visited regularly, bringing updated financing documents and coaching me on auction strategy. We refined my approach based on intelligence he had gathered about Ryan's consortium, their likely maximum bid, their financing structure, their confidence level. They're treating this as a foregone conclusion, Marcus reported after speaking with a colleague who was tangentially involved with Ryan's investment group. Dr. Mitchell has apparently told his partners that no one else has the resources or interest to seriously compete. I smiled at the familiar arrogance. Ryan had always assumed that his desires, by virtue of being his, were uniquely important and worthy of fulfillment. The possibility that someone else might want the same thing, might be willing to work equally hard to achieve it, rarely entered his calculations. 2 days before the auction, Ryan appeared at the house unannounced, legal documents in hand. The settlement proposal, he explained, extending the folder. My attorney feels it's extremely generous under the circumstances. I accepted the folder without opening it. I'll have my lawyer review it. Of course. He glanced around the living room, where I'd been working on final designs for a client presentation. You're working again? Consulting for Eleanor Winter's agency, I confirmed. I started during bed rest. Ryan looked genuinely surprised. I had no idea. You didn't ask, I pointed out simply. How are your plans for Oak Ridge coming along? His expression shifted to one of cautious pride. The consortium is finalized. We're well positioned for the auction. He paused, studying me. How did you know about Oak Ridge? You've talked about it for years, I reminded him. And I saw the transfers to Oak Ridge Acquisitions LLC when I was reviewing our finances. A flash of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed his face. That was meant to be a surprise, a new start after Lily was born. The revision of history was so automatic, so unconscious, that I almost pitied him. In his mind, perhaps he truly believed that the property he'd obsessed over, saved for secretly, and planned to purchase with his new partner, had somehow been intended as a gift for the family he was abandoning. A fascinating interpretation, I said mildly. Will you be attending the auction personally? Of course. The consortium expects it. He studied me with renewed wariness. Why the interest in Oak Ridge suddenly? I shrugged lightly. Just curious about your plans. It helps to know what future co-parenting might look like. Ryan seemed satisfied with this explanation, his ego preventing him from considering that I might have plans of my own regarding the property. The settlement proposal includes continuing use of this house, he offered, gesturing around us. I thought that would provide stability for Lily. The assumption that I would want to remain in the home where he had installed his mistress during my pregnancy was so obtuse it almost made me laugh. That's thoughtful, I said instead. As I mentioned, I'll review everything with my attorney. After he left, I opened the settlement documents, scanning the terms with increasing disbelief. What Ryan characterized as generous was, in fact, carefully calculated to maintain his image while minimizing his actual obligations. The financial terms were adequate but not substantial, certainly not reflective of my contributions to his career or the opportunity costs I had incurred by setting aside my own professional development. More troubling were the custody provisions, which established a theoretical 70-30 split that could be modified by mutual agreement based on Ryan's work schedule. In practice, this meant he could claim the appearance of involved fatherhood while participating only when convenient. I forwarded the documents to my attorney with a brief note outlining my concerns, then returned to my auction preparations. The timing was tight. The settlement negotiations and the Oak Ridge purchase were proceeding simultaneously, each with significant implications for my financial future. If I won the auction, my leverage in the divorce would increase substantially. If I lost, I might need to accept terms closer to Ryan's proposal. The morning of the auction dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the nursery windows as I nursed Lily one final time before Natalie arrived to babysit. Today we changed the narrative, I whispered to my daughter, who gazed up at me with solemn eyes that already seemed to hold wisdom beyond her weeks. Natalie arrived promptly, shooing me toward the bedroom to prepare. Go make yourself gorgeous and intimidating, she instructed, lifting Lily expertly to her shoulder. I want you to walk into that auction room looking like a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. I selected my outfit carefully. An emerald green dress that brought out my eyes, paired with subtle gold jewelry and the comfortable yet elegant heels I'd worn to my final interview at Eleanor's agency years ago. My hair, which I'd recently cut into a sleek bob, framed my face in a way that felt both professional and confidently feminine. Marcus arrived to drive me to the auction, whistling softly when I opened the door. Perfect, he approved. You look like someone who belongs at Oak Ridge. The auction was being held at the Lakeside Harbor Convention Center, its grand ballroom transformed into an auction space with seating for serious bidders in front and standing room for spectators in back. As Marcus and I entered, I spotted Ryan immediately, seated near the front with two other men in expensive suits, presumably representatives from his investment consortium. Let's stay toward the back until bidding begins, Marcus suggested quietly. No need to tip our hand too early. I nodded, positioning myself where I could observe without being immediately noticed. Ryan appeared relaxed, confident, occasionally checking his phone or exchanging comments with his partners. He had worn his power suit, the charcoal gray, Tom Ford he reserved for important negotiations and hospital board meetings. The auctioneer began with standard preliminaries, describing Oak Ridge Estate in glowing terms while slides of the property appeared on a large screen behind him. Even in digital form, the mansion was breathtaking, grand without being ostentatious, historic yet timelessly elegant. "We'll begin." "The bidding at $1.2 million, the auctioneer announced. "Do I have $1.2 million? A paddle raised near the front. Not Ryan's consortium, but another bidder I couldn't identify from my position. $1, $2 million, thank you, sir. "Do I have $1, $3 million? Another paddle, then another. The initial bidding moved quickly, rising to $1.8 million before Ryan's group entered the fray, the representative to his right raising their paddle with casual confidence. Marcus touched my elbow gently. "Let them establish momentum," he murmured. "We'll wait." By $2, $2 million, the field had narrowed to 3 serious contenders: Ryan's consortium, a silver-haired woman in the second row, and a man who appeared to be representing a corporate interest. The bidding slowed, increments dropping from $100,000 to $50,000 as participants calculated their limits. At $2, $4 million, the corporate representative shook his head, dropping out of the competition. Only Ryan's group and the silver-haired woman remained. "Now," Marcus whispered, and I raised my paddle for the first time. $5 million from the pie lady in the back, the auctioneer acknowledged, his professional demeanor not quite concealing his interest in this late entry. Ryan turned, scanning the crowd to identify this unexpected competition. When his gaze found mine, the shock that crossed his face was everything I had imagined: confusion, disbelief, and the first flicker of genuine concern. The silver-haired woman countered at $2.55 million. Ryan's representative, after a brief consultation, raised to $2.06 million. I met Marcus's eyes, receiving his slight nod before raising my paddle again. $7 million, the auctioneer confirmed. The silver-haired woman hesitated, then shook her head slightly, dropping out of the bidding. Now it was just Ryan's consortium and me. Ryan was staring openly now, his professional composure faltering as he whispered urgently to his partners. One of them appeared to be making calculations on a notepad, while the other was speaking intently into his phone. $75 million, their representative called, raising their paddle with less confidence than before. Marcus and I had set my absolute ceiling at $9 million, the maximum my financing would support while leaving enough reserves for necessary renovations and maintaining a safety net for Lily and me. We were approaching that threshold faster than anticipated. $8 million, I countered, maintaining a calm exterior despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Ryan's consortium huddled in intense discussion, the representative on the phone appearing to argue for a higher bid, while Ryan himself looked increasingly unsettled. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, they raised their paddle again. $85 million, the auctioneer announced, looking toward me expectantly. I hesitated, mentally reviewing my financial calculations one final time. This was the moment. Continue or concede, risk or retreat. In that brief pause, I caught Ryan's expression, a mixture of determination and something darker, a refusal to be bested, particularly by me. It was the same expression he had worn when dismissing my career aspirations, when explaining why his professional advancement had to take priority, when justifying decisions that benefited him at my expense. $9 million, I said clearly, raising my paddle with deliberate confidence. The auctioneer nodded, turning his attention back to Ryan's group. Do I have $95 million? The consortium representatives were now openly arguing, one seemingly advocating to continue, while the other shook his head emphatically. Ryan himself was on his phone, his expression increasingly desperate as he presumably sought additional funding or approval. After a tense minute that stretched like an hour, the auctioneer prompted again. Is that $295 million from paddle number 8? Ryan looked directly at me, his face a complex mixture of anger, disbelief, and dawning recognition that he might actually lose. Then, with visible reluctance, he shook his head. Very well, $9 million going once, going twice. The auctioneer paused, scanning the room for any last-minute entry. Sold to paddle number 42 for $9 million? The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. I had done it. Oak Ridge Estate, the property Ryan had coveted for years, had secretly saved for, had planned to showcase his success and status, was now mine. Marcus squeezed my hand, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal delight. Congratulations, Emma. You did it. As we moved forward to complete the immediate paperwork required to secure the purchase, Ryan intercepted us, his face flushed with barely controlled anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, voice low but intense. "Where did you get this kind of money?" I met his gaze calmly. "My grandmother's inheritance, combined with historical property financing that Marcus secured. It's all perfectly legitimate." "This is insane, Emma. You're doing this to spite me, to punish me for the divorce." "No, Ryan. I'm doing this because Oak Ridge is a magnificent property with excellent investment potential. My plans for it simply differ from yours." His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What plans?" "The main floor will become a design studio and gallery. The carriage house will be converted to offices. The upper floors will remain residential for Lily and me." I smiled slightly. Eleanor is quite excited about the possibilities. Ryan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as his wife or Lily's mother, but as an individual, with ambitions and capabilities entirely separate from him. The realization came far too late. "You'll regret this," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "The maintenance alone will bankrupt you." "I appreciate your concern," I replied evenly, "but I've done my research. The property is financially sustainable under my business model." As he turned to leave, visibly struggling to maintain his composure, I added softly, "By the way, I've reviewed your settlement proposal. My attorney will be contacting yours with some significant revisions." 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of Oak Ridge Estate, watching the sunset paint Crescent Lake in shades of gold and amber. Behind me, the sounds of conversation and laughter filtered through the open French doors as guests explored the newly renovated main floor, transformed into a showcase for local artists and designers. The gallery opening was the culmination of months of intensive work, restoring original architectural details while updating systems, preserving the property's historic character while reimagining its purpose. The result was more beautiful than I had dared imagine. Soaring ceilings with restored crown molding, hardwood floors polished to a warm glow, modern lighting that highlighted both the architecture and the artwork without disturbing the period aesthetic. Eleanor appeared beside me, champagne flute in hand. "Quite a triumph," she observed, nodding toward the crowded gallery. "3 of your designs have already sold, and Marcus tells me the Boston Design Quarterly wants to feature the renovation in their fall issue." I smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain of Ryan's betrayal had gradually receded, replaced by the satisfaction of creating something uniquely mine. The divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier with terms far more equitable than Ryan's initial proposal, a reflection of my strengthened financial position and his diminished leverage after losing the auction. "Have you seen who just arrived?" Eleanor asked, her tone carefully neutral. I turned slightly to see Ryan standing awkwardly in the gallery entrance, alone and clearly uncomfortable. He was thinner than I remembered, the confident posture I had once found so attractive now reading as rigid, even defensive. "I didn't invite him," I murmured, though I wasn't entirely surprised by his appearance. "Do you want security to intervene?" I considered the question, watching as Ryan surveyed the space, taking in the successful execution of a vision he had never believed I could achieve. No, I decided. Let him see. As if sensing my gaze, Ryan looked toward the terrace. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a moment I felt the echo of our shared history, the dreams we had once had, the future we had planned together, the love that had gradually eroded under the constant pressure of his ambition and my accommodation. Then Natalie appeared at my side, Lily in her arms. My daughter reached for me, her face lighting with recognition and joy. I took her, breathing in her sweet scent as I turned back toward the lake, toward the future stretching before us, a future built not on dependency or compromise, but on courage and self-determination. When I glanced back toward the entrance, Ryan was gone. I felt no triumph in his departure, no vindication in his evident regret. Those emotions belonged to an earlier stage of healing, to a woman who still defined herself in relation to him. The woman I had become, standing on the terrace of Oak Ridge Estate with my daughter in my arms, surrounded by the fruits of my vision and labor, had no need for such reactive satisfactions. I had something far more valuable. A life authentically mine, shaped by my own choices, filled with work that mattered, and relationships that nourished rather than diminished. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared over Crescent Lake, I carried Lily back into the gallery, into our home, into our future, into the life we were building together, one decision, one day, one moment at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.